So welcome everybody. My name is Trish Ewell. This is the Owl's Ledge Google Hangout, and today I'm really excited because we've got co-author Richard Seitz for the Leaving Addie for Sam Field Guide, and also the co-author of Leaving Addie for Sam, the original book that came out. How long ago did that come out, Richard? Like 18 months ago? The book hasn't been out for long.
September 2012, I guess.
September of 2012.
Yeah.
And then Leaving Addie for Sam, the actual field guide, just came out earlier this spring.
Yes, it did. It came out at ICE this year.
And in May of 2014. So, and you've got some excellent endorsements on the back of the book, as I see here.
Well, one or two of them are pretty good.
One or two are actually pretty good. So you are Richard Seitz, Vice President of Marketing and Training for Allen Interactions.
Yes.
And you run the studio down in Tampa, Florida.
I have recently come back and help out with operations. So yes, I oversee our Tampa operations in addition to all of our external and internal training and our marketing and outreach.
Excellent. And you have an anniversary with Allen Interactions coming up, right? How many years?
This February will be 10.
10 years. Wow, very nice. Excellent. And so you come from an academic background. So before you were at Allen, you were actually at a university.
Yeah, that's right. I was at the University of West Florida. I had been there, well, for too long. I did all of my education there, but I was working as a faculty member in the education department. We called it professional studies, and they still do, but it included education, nursing, and these other things, but teaching graduate level courses, instructional design, some software development, things like that we used for instructional and educational purposes.
Okay. And so, we've actually over the past couple of years now, which is really kind of crazy, because we were just talking at a conference that we were both at with a panel discussion in Dallas, that we've actually done quite a number of different presentations together. We've done a radio show together, and just really trying to talk about, learning professionals and those who design learning. How do we get people to just move that needle in that transformation, from training and development and very content-focused learning to really more learning and performance, really creating learning assets that matter, that make a difference in the organizations that we serve.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I agree. I think that's the biggest challenge that we have, and you and I talk about this all the time. What is it why don't we take that next step as a profession or as an industry? And it's baffling at many times that there's such, intelligent, educated, really proactive people that choose to not take that next step, and that's the part that's baffling. I think when you and I talk about it, and you see these talented, wonderful people, and you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And I know that you do it every single day, and I try to do it when I can get beyond the business that I'm working in doing day in, day out, and that's just to kind of help people and to carry that message that we can do better, and we should.
Absolutely. And today, I really wanted to get us together to have a conversation more like this, more kind of informal, having a discussion. There's so many times when we're presenting either individually or together where we're talking about what, and you're going through like the basics of SAM, and we're very focused on another particular track. And I thought today we would talk a bit more about going kind of a little bit deeper into that conversation, and that is into the how. Yeah. Because so many people, I think there's an awful lot of media out there between the both of us. How many times have you done the SAM presentation now? Like 5,000?
Or somewhere closer, probably like 6,000, but it feels like 1,000,000.
Right. So there's an awful lot of footage out there about the basics of SAM. But I think that what happens in those presentations a lot of times and on the webcasts is that we're so busy walking through the mechanics of what to do that this is a rare opportunity today to actually talk about, okay, well, learning professionals that are interested in moving in this direction, how do they get started doing it? Like, what's the how behind all of that?
I tell you, it is, and it happened the other day after we were at that conference, and I was flying home the next morning, and I was thinking to myself, the point that you made, that my presentation that time you felt like was a lot more grounded, it was a lot more, to spoke to the people in the room about, the benefits and the opportunities. And so I was thinking to myself, I actually am a hypocrite as well, because I go in to give these presentations on SAM, and I talk about blocking and tackling like it's process, and it is, and I do believe SAM gives us the opportunity, but that's not the point of it. The point of it is envisioning what we do as instructional design, training and development professionals differently. And I believe deep down myself that SAM, or an iterative process like that, it's a belief that we should approach things differently. Not do I follow each of the steps of SAM. And I do find myself, because that's what people want to know, they want to compare one process they have to the SAM process, and can I match this to that? And yes, we can, and we can go through all those things, but that's not the point. If you don't believe that there's a better way of doing it, if you don't believe that we should be much more consultative, you don't believe that we should be iterative in our design, that we should build behind expectations instead of in front of them, that we should focus on learners, all of those things, then the process is irrelevant. And yet, here's what I do. I go in and I tell them, step 1, step 2, step 3, and so I'm just a hypocrite on the other side of the coin.
Wow, that's well, that's pretty powerful in and of itself. But I agree, and that's what happens in these presentations, is that people go right down into the weeds, right? So, and I thought the presentation in Dallas that you did was particularly great because you did the whole context and the setup beforehand on the philosophical reasons behind the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So changing from order taker to strategic partner within an organization, and that SAM and an iterative process is a vehicle to do that. It's a means to the end. It's not the end.
Right.
And I think that's what winds up happening is, people get stuck, we, and ourselves included, because we're human, we get stuck on the tools, and we get stuck on that process instead of stuck on the end goal, focused on the end goal, which is, meeting learner needs and organizational needs, to whatever degree we can within the constraints of that particular project.
Right, and the reality of it is, and I do say this at every time I speak about it, but I think it kind of goes in passing, that Michael Allen is, the CEO and founder of Allen Interactions and created Authorware, and is the person who came up with SAM. But SAM, he came up with that because he had a belief in the type of learning experience that needed to be created. We didn't start with SAM. SAM literally was the means to achieving training and learning experiences that are meaningful, memorable, and motivational. And we needed a process that allowed us to create that. And ADDIE was not that. It is not that in its traditional form. And I know a lot of people do a lot of things that are called ADDIE, but in that linear waterfall approach, you can't create very engaging, very interactive, especially media-driven training as we do nowadays. It just didn't work out for it. So we started with the ends in mind and made SAM, which was simply the means.
And continues to be the means. And you and I had a conversation many events ago about, we were kind of talking about a general contractor. If I hired a general contractor to come here and actually do some work around the house, and all the guy talked about were the hammer, the hammer, like, this is the hammer, and this is how I use the hammer, and I bang nails with the hammer. But this is what we do as learning professionals, right? Like, we just take a particular tool out and then focus on, we just besiege people with, okay, well, I'm going to take this particular tool and I'm going to do these things with it, instead of creating that dialogue to find out from them what it is that they really most need.
Absolutely, and that's when you get back to ADDIE versus SAM, this kind of pseudo debate that we like to create.
Right.
That's the real truth, and people will tell you, well, SAM's nothing more than ADDIE, because what they're saying is, you have a red toolbox and I have a blue toolbox.
Right.
And who cares? That's not the whole point. I'm telling you that my toolbox is going to be used this way, and I don't know what you're doing with your toolbox. So let's move on by talking about it. What are we building, and how we're going to go about building it. To your point, let's quit discussing the hammer. Great, go hammer something.
Right. Then go. Right. Exactly. Then go. So, one of the things that we don't get an awful lot of opportunity to get into, and again, let me take a step back for a second. The thing that I really like about these field guides that ASTD Press, soon I guess to be ATD Press, has been coming out with is, these are actually the books that contain So they take the concepts or the theory that are in a book like Leaving Addie for Sam, and then the field guide as a companion book to the original book actually has the templates and the process for, what to do in order to get started to actually apply that to practice. So, a lot of the instruction, if you will, on, okay, do this, do this, do this, is actually documented in the actual book. So there's some really great stuff in here, like about getting started with a savvy start, which really starts the SAM process. But the savvy start is so significant in really getting the right stakeholders and the right people together in the room to find out really what is the performance goal. Like, what are we trying to do here? So that being said, again, you've got an awful lot of information in here as far as what kind of technology and what kind of resources you want in the room when you do a savvy start. But from a people side of things, when somebody is trying to get the stakeholders together for the first time to really have the conversation around performance, what is the agenda? Like, what's the end game? Like, what are we trying to do? What are some ideas about how to get started with that when we're trying to bring about that kind of change?
Well, truthfully, measuring the quality or the anticipated outcome of a savvy start, it can be done on, 3 axes: the X, the Y, the Z, and it can get, somewhat complicated. For the extent, like, I would want to make sure that we had a good enough group that we were able to brainstorm the quality of what we want to happen and what does it look like in the reality of it. Then I also want to make sure that I have the right people in the room that are going to be the ones that are going to say yes or no later on, so we can have things in front of them. And then the Z-axis, which I always kind of say is the wrench in the works, is the length of time that I have. And we have been talking, Angel Green, the co-author of the Field Guide, and I have been talking a lot about with people how to make customized savvy starts, because these things were originally intended to be 3-day working sessions. Very powerful, very hands-on prototyping, designing sessions, a lot of brainstorming. Then they've come back in what I like to call the modern era of SAM to 2 days, because the reality, we just can't ask people to be trapped in a room for 3 days with us. And then most organizations, especially internal otherwise, aren't even going to get anywhere near 2 days. So how do you start a savvy, or do I have a savvy start to begin a project when you have 4 hours or 3 hours or whatever the case is? So when we talk about what we want to get out of the savvy start, it really is the intent of starting a project in a particular way. That we're going to brainstorm what is the performance we're talking about. We're going to discuss and debate what does success look like. How is it measured? How did we identify this need for training? And then we're going to start sketching out ideas for interactions, even if it's going to be an instructor-led event. But even e-learning is obviously a lot easier to sketch out, but even instructor-led events, we want to sketch out in certain types of these events and prototype them. We want to have rough and ugly prototypes of people that are functional, that we can go, that really doesn't work well, or that's a great idea. And so when we come out of whatever this collective is that we're calling a savvy start, we're going to have these functional design pieces that we can move forward and continue on with. That's the essence of starting that way. And as I like to say, if you start with performance, you'll end with performance. If you start with content, you'll end with content. So that's why we want to have a savvy start, make sure we're focused on performance, and that's our end goal.
And that makes an awful lot of sense, right? But we're kind of fighting at both ends. I mean, as far as learning professionals who design learning is concerned. So number one, we've got to educate ourselves. Then we've got to educate our stakeholders in shifting the process, because not only have we as learning professionals been very focused on content-driven training programs, but our stakeholders are used to that. And so sometimes even when you invite them to something like a Savvy Start, people are just resistant to that process. So how, and I hear you when you say, so Savvy Starts traditionally or historically were like a 3-day process, then it was like skinny down to 2, then it was like, okay, well, even that's not necessarily realistic of getting all the right people in the room to talk about performance. Maybe it's only, a half day or 4 hours or, whatever it is. How do you even initiate the conversation and address what seems to be initial resistance to trying a new process?
Well, the reality of everything is that this just doesn't, like, hey, we're going to have a Savvy Start tomorrow. It's not going to work out like that. I mean, this is a bigger conversation organizationally about transitioning to a new method or a new model for building instruction. So this would be one of those kind of baby steps, or moving the needle, as I say. Maybe it's just having a 1-hour discussion about what we mean by training and learning, or these learning experiences and what we hope to get out of them, and see the power of having. We're not talking about what's the content. Don't bring your 3-ring binders in the room. Don't, let's not sit here and scope out something. Let's not say it needs to be an hour. Let's literally say, how do we define what success is and what performance is, and then just have a discussion about that. Then you can, hopefully, this will produce a success or a win for you. But then you can have a conversation about, now let's think about if we took this a step further and we actually started building our training based on this conversation. It starts that whole consultative approach that you want to do in order to get people to come around to it. A Savvy Start is a very provocative beginning to training projects for most organizations. Most of the time, someone sends an email, then they drop off 4 3-ring binders, and then they say, we'll see you in 8 weeks. And that's how these things work. To say, no, I want 8 people in the room, and let's get together and debate this and stuff like that. They're going to go, for what? This is just training. Go make it. So it is. You do have to have that conversation first, I think, to show the value of having a brainstorming event to begin the project.
And the value of actually trying to define the success criteria. I mean, my background is in information technology and in learning and performance, and trying to get people to pin down and be definitive about what good looks like is a challenge in and of itself. I mean, it's part of the reason why I left managing projects on the IT side, was that I had such difficulty with trying to get stakeholders to actually define, okay, at the end of this heavy investment that we're going to make into software development or implementation or deployment or whatever it is, what's the end game? Like, what are we trying to achieve, and how do we work backwards from that? And it can be difficult, especially in an organization where the culture is such that people are not accustomed to putting a stake in the ground and going, okay, we're driving towards this. We all know what bad looks like, but but it takes an awful lot of effort in order to define what good looks like, especially up front in the process.
So I'll tell you this, and this came about, we've been doing for 2 years now, as long as the book's been out, these Leaving Addy for Sam workshops.
Yeah.
And in the workshops, we've been kind of, Angel and I, as we do each new one, we think back and use the past examples as what we might want to improve upon. And so in this past year, I asked this one activity of the group, I say, I want you to define a performance issue in a retail setting. So you tell me, as a consumer, this isn't, I don't want you to put I'm everybody's hat, you are just a consumer walking through a retail situation. Identify a moment of underperformance, a problem, if you would, and I want you to describe that, and I have them sketched out or whatever. But the point of that is, when I ask people to identify a problem, there's one of 2 ways. That it's either completely just this broad, general malaise of something that's happening, or it's so unbelievably specific that it's unnecessary. And so problem identification is difficult for us as a field because we've never really been asked to do that. We give it a lot of talk, but in reality, people aren't asking us to go discover a training issue or identify a problem. We're either validating or analyzing something someone else told us was an issue. And the flip side of that is, whether it's very specific or it's so broad that you could never address it, I asked the next thing, what would you do to fix it? Now again, I'm talking about a consumer in a retail environment, and it may be something as simple as, bad customer service, or I think one time someone just wanted their receipt when they made a purchase. And I said, what would you do to fix it? And to a person, it has always been the case. There'll be a list of 9 or 10 or 15 different things that they're training initiatives they would do. And I'm like, that's how you would fix that. Why wouldn't you just ask for your receipt? Or tell an employee to hand them? I mean, we just see the world differently. One, it's hard for us to identify problems specifically because that's not what we're asked to do. And 2, we think that all we have is that hammer, and we're going to use the hammer to, fix the problem, and it's always a training initiative.
Well, that's right. As learning professionals, we tend to go red box, blue box, right?
Yeah.
So Addie, Sam, and we also have a tendency of going, ooh, look, I've got a hammer, and I've got a hammer, and I've got a hammer, and we don't look at the other potential interventions in order to
Yeah.
solve performance problems in organizations, and we need to do that. So Mark.
Yes.
So I know that you guys have been implementing SAM within your organization, and that you've got kind of a SAM and Addie overlay going on, which, interestingly enough, actually, Richard and I in this conference in Dallas the other day were talking about. We like to do it to sort of provoke a conversation, to talk about that you have to leave Addie for Sam, but people get to use both, or kind of a blend, especially as learning professionals as we're making this transition. But what's it been like for you and for your team of learning professionals as you've ventured into using an iterative process like SAM along with Addie?
Well, I'd say two things I can really discuss on this, Trish. One is one of the things that we've been able to do in our design process is, from spending time with the book, is we've started with the building activities. So right after our training plan and assessment. So first of all, in our assessment, we were able to engage the stakeholders and sponsors much earlier, and then ask for end users to join in that assessment meeting. So normally when I'm having an assessment meeting, I'm meeting with the sponsor or the stakeholder, says there's a problem and we need to do something about it and we need some training. And I'm like, okay, great. But so now what we've been able to do is ask for some of the end users. In this case, we're a sales organization, some of our sales people to sit in and get their perspective on, do you guys agree that this is the challenge? And then how would you like to have the training? I mean, and what activities in the past have you experienced that have been impactful and that you've enjoyed, and some that you haven't? So we've been able to get some of their perspective earlier, which we didn't really do before. We just leaned right on the stakeholders or sponsors right first. So that's been helpful. Secondly, in our design process, one of the things we've done is begin right with activities. So after we establish the objectives, let's not think about the modules. Let's just think about all the performance objectives that we have, and let's just create activities right from these in the beginning, because we're trying to make everything much more activity driven and stay away from content if possible. So that's been one of the other benefits. And there's still a challenge. We had this discussion a couple months ago. One of the projects that we're still getting near the end of delivering was I sat down with we had a sales council. One of our internal supervisors has a group of salespeople, and I went to lunch with them and said, well, hey guys, there's this WBT that they want built. They always want a WBT. Hey, can you just build a WBT for us, something quick that they could take? And I asked them, hey, how would you guys like to see this? I said, well, we'd like to have someone, one of our portfolio managers come in and deliver it in person and ask some questions. It would be great to get their perspective. And then I engaged the individual, one of our portfolio managers, and got them into it. Then when I went back to the stakeholders, like, well, Mark, we really need this for a larger audience. We really need this to be a WBT. So it kind of got. So the challenge there, I think, for us is, and I think Richard mentioned it earlier, is you need to have a meeting up front about, hey, this is how we want our process to be. This is how we want to go forward. This is how we want to change what we do. Instead of, me just coming in as a pure consultant and asking questions of you, the stakeholder, we really want to get everybody involved, which is, again, is tough sometimes when you have as I say, a really good relationship with your audience. They know you well. They know exactly what you do. They're kind of sometimes reluctant to really go deep into defining a problem. But overall, we've made good strides on it, and I'm again an advocate of pushing that forward. So, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. So, Richard, a question for you, because this comes up an awful lot. When we're trying to move the dial, like in the example that Mark just shared, or the story that Mark just shared. One of the things that I love about the presentation that you do about SAM is where you talk about the big Q and the little q. And you talk about these different versions of quality, like what does quality mean? And there's the quadrant, that you put up of there's these like, different kind of competing needs. So how do we as learning professionals provide the instructional integrity, but then balance that against organizational constraints and balance that against learner needs and balance that against what the team is trying to do? How do you balance these competing interests? And I think, Mark was really sort of inferring this in the example that he just shared with what's going on at his workplace.
Well, I tell you, one of the worst things and about our profession is, especially in e-learning, because there's nice tangible moments that we can ship around everybody, is that we give awards out for quality of the instruction as though they can be measured in a vacuum, as though there's some objective ruler to it. Now, we know good things and bad things. I mean, you can see some, pretty heinous, read, click next, read, click. I mean, that kind of stuff we know off the bat isn't great. But other than that, what you have to look at is what happens from the very beginning. What are the challenges that have been identified that we're going to train, provide some intervention for? Now, I come into the room as the instructional designer or the consultant. Well, let's say instructional designer. I need to be a consultant, and I have my instructional design principles, and I understand how to identify or focus on learner needs. Well, that's the little Q of quality. That's my job, to keep an eye on it. Well, the big Q are the people that are paying me or commissioning me to do that, and their quality measures are most likely influenced by the organizational expectations. What have they done in the past? What do they want to do now? What's an efficient way of doing it? And then the team desires. There are people that are on our training and development team that just like narrated audio. I mean, and there's no expectation from the organization, and there may not be any real instructional value to it. But we have to address and acknowledge these things, because at the end of the day, we can't stand firm on any one of them. We can't stand firm on our measure or their measure. We have to be able to balance it out. And that's why I talk about this kind of big Q, little q, these two measures of quality. Our job as training and or learning and development people or instructional designers is to be able to navigate that and to consult to produce the best learning experience given these parameters. We can't go into the room and say we're going to do one thing and this is why we're going to do it, and because we've been trained or educated, this is the way it is. That's not going to produce the best possible event. There is no absolute measure of quality. There certainly are some instructional things that we know are good and bad, but the collective is really what matters, and it's getting this through our organizations and getting it in the hands of learners is what matters the most.
And that makes perfect sense. And I know one of the things, that we've talked about before and you've said often is that you often coach your team. As a matter of fact, your team at Allen about, sometimes you have to, what's the phrase, don't let your principles
get in the way of success.
Get in the way of success. So what does that mean? How do we as instructional designers,
Well, one, I think we need more principles to start with.
Okay.
I do think that we need to and I happen to think that some of those that we've listed out and leaving Annie for Sam are pretty good principles to live by. But again, those are mine. And I think there's some basic principles about what we should do and why we should do it. And the reason I say that is it's just like me walking in the room with a set of instructional design principles and I go, we're absolutely going to build it this way. Then what's going to happen is I'm going to have shutdown on the stakeholders' part, on the team's part. It may not be even addressing the learner needs as well as it can. And so my principles would have gotten in the way of actually producing the best quality product. Now, I want to let those principles guide what I do, but at the end of the day, if because I'm going to hold tight to those, we don't even get a learning experience or some kind of intervention in the hands of learners, I will have failed everyone, wouldn't I? I mean, that's what the real challenge of it is.
That's absolutely right. And that every time I've heard you say that now in a presentation, that really just resonates with me, because I am certainly guilty of letting my principles get in the way of producing the, whatever it is of value and trying to advance something forward. And I understand, for me in my personal experience, it's really frustrating. I mean, it's really frustrating when you know how we can do better, or we want to provide better value, or we think we know a better particular way, and we've got to compromise. And sometimes it feels like, ugh. So how do we do that? Get past our principles getting in the way without feeling like we're losing some kind of integrity?
Well, my point about that is, and that's a very good issue, that we have to understand our principles relative to the parameters that we are faced with this issue. And if we come into this project not understanding organizational expectations or potential team member desires in this, then all we are is measuring those as discounts or somehow compromising against our principles, when in reality they're not. Those are influences on how we're going to build that. So it's really what we're looking at. Are we going to produce a worse product because the client we're working with or the stakeholder or whatever prefers to have the logo in the top left corner? And the answer is no. That's not going to ruin the experience.
Right.
Is it going to ruin the experience because they want to put 2 pages of reading content in there before a scenario-driven interaction? It's not going to ruin it. Maybe we prefer not to do that. Maybe that wasn't the best case. Maybe it's a little less motivating and exciting intro and engaging form of instruction. But at the end of the day, it's only 2 pages they have to read, and they get into this scenario-driven event, and that's what we really want them to do, is to be able to practice it and be successful.
So Richard, it's Mark here. It's really then based on what they want and the experience that they want in terms of either the learning or how it's delivered, or obviously we're helping them to establish performance objectives. It seems to me that as a light bulb went off, that the big thing that I need to do in our organization is, and I've been planning to do this, and I don't know why I haven't, amongst everything else that goes on, is sitting down with the sales leaders that we normally would work with on any ongoing project or new project for training, and laying out, here's how our process has worked in the past. Because I don't think they really know. We've never done that, and laid out and say, here's how we've done things. Here's how we build things. You ever wonder why we come and we ask these questions? And then we show up and we deliver it. I don't think that's ever really been laid out. And then from there saying, here's how we're doing things differently, and here's why we're doing things differently, to get some buy-in. Because normally we're saying, hey, we got a new project and I want to do things a little bit differently now, but on a more formal basis, introducing our new process going forward. I think that's, for me, certainly a meeting that needs to take place if we're going to move in the direction of building learning experiences that, again, are going to meet, that are much more engaging and are more end-user focused than designer or tool focused, if you will. So
yeah, I absolutely think my big thing is transparency, that we need to share with people up front what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and the purpose that we're doing it. We may not be successful in this step. That's the whole point of an iterative process, that we get to the end and go, that's garbage, and yet we have the opportunity to throw it away and do it again. But I want to be transparent with them because I want their involvement. This isn't that's the biggest difference to me between a kind of a waterfall or a linear approach like a very traditional ADDIE and an iterative process, is that I don't have to go through analysis in the end product. We have to go forward with it or tweak it. But I can do mini analysis as we're building and designing and creating some prototypes and discussing those with people.
Quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What happens many times, again, when you have an internal training department, we come in after the intervention has been selected for whatever performance issue has been identified, and so we're just simply asked to train, and here's the content, here's the tool, here's the system, and you guys build it as is. So we don't have as much, particularly on some of the larger projects, input until we're asked to come in and it's almost ready to go, or they're building the system, that type of thing. Any suggestions on what we may be able to do there to embed ourselves earlier?
The pragmatist in me says, how awesome is this? I mean, most of the work's done for me. I just need to go find a way of making this engaging.
Right.
It's not the best case scenario, obviously, because your hands are tied on a lot of different things. But it just changes the target for you. So you literally are saying, I have all of these things in front of me. I want to go make this engaging. Now I'm falling back on not my process principles, but my design principles. How do I make it meaningful, memorable, motivational? How do I employ the context, challenge, activity, feedback structure to this? Can I do it? And if I can, then let's prototype some things out. Let's try to see what will work. in these small bite-sized moments of what I have, you've got a 2-day ILT they want you to do, and it's going to be on these different subjects. Can I put 4 or 5 activities in there that makes it engaging, that we're really going to get that transfer we want?
Thank you, and that's what we've done again, is we've built, the first thing that we go show them is, hey, we got a list of activities based upon our experience. So we've been able to do that, so I think that's been helpful. I think that the little bit of the challenge then is keeping them engaged throughout the process as we come back and say, we built this, and all right, now we want to show you this, and we tweaked it, and we want to show you it again, of course, with the constraints that you have in terms of just getting something delivered on time.
Right.
Okay.
So when you're under time pressure, and that's the key thing too. People think iterating is making new drafts of it over and over again. You're not making a draft of something. You're making a conversation piece that is disposable. And so when you put something in front of them, this idea that you're going to go, hey, look at this. I didn't spend a lot of time on this, but this is what we're thinking about doing. This is how it works and how it plays out. So somebody can say, I hate that, or hey, that's cool, or they can gain inspiration from it and go, well, what about, and then you can add to it, again, with a little bit of time. Now, that's going to be thrown away. And I'm actually going to go build whatever this learning experience is after I've come up with the design. Iterating towards a design is not just on draft and revising it and a draft and revising it. It literally is putting something on the chopping block. If it makes it, it makes it. If it doesn't, we have to throw it away. Michael Allen, and this is one of my favorite things and he said a lot of things that I really like, but this is lately my new favorite thing, I should say. He said, ask the question, what can we do, which is an additive type thing. And Sam says, why shouldn't we do this? And the key part of that is the this. I need to build something to say why I shouldn't do it. And that's the prototype. But I may answer because X, Y, and Z, so I need to be able to throw it away. And so I don't want to have anything in the design process that I'm tied to or committed to, because I really want to make sure that I have the option of disposing it and trying again. So that's when you're doing that, just keep things light and quick and brief, but that they're an extension of a conversation. That's what really prototypes and examples are.
All right, Richard, thank you.
You're welcome.
And what's really striking me in all of this is that there's an awful lot of humility that's required as learning professionals. I mean, we're talking about some new processes where we've got to get out of our own way, we've got to let the ego go, and we've got to have confidence that we're driving towards the same end goal as the stakeholders and sponsor that we represent in a project, rather than picking these dog fights and fighting over things that we think are of value, rather than really listening and paying attention to what's of value to the organization or to that particular project and the people involved in that particular project.
So, Trish, you know that I have pretty strong opinions on things, and I'm not easily swayed by lesser opinions. Let's say that. And I mean, I have formally trained. I spent a decade at a university. I hold a master's and a doctorate in education. I've been working here at Allen Interactions alongside Michael Allen, writing books and doing trainings and stuff for 10 years. And I have no clue what the right thing is. There is no way that someone just who haphazardly stumbles on it is going to have any clue of what the right thing is. We have to go discover that. And that's what we have to be as instructional designers. We've got to go find out what the right thing is. What is the right performance moment for the learners? What are those learner expectations? What are the team member expectations? What are the expectations of the organization? What are the design principles that are necessary at this moment? These things can't be predetermined. That's another reason why written analysis and written design documents, they're just an enormous waste of time, because we need to actually do things and try things to discover what it is that's important instructionally for that moment. And I think that's what we make ourselves be comfortable in the fact that, oh, I have ADDIE, I have this process, and if I go through this process, then I'm doing the instructional correct thing. I'm making it instructionally sound, which I don't even know what that means. And I'm feeling good about myself as a professional, and so when I get to the end, this is quality as defined by instructional measures, whatever. But that's not true at all. I could absolutely do things that are terrible. I could absolutely make things that were unengaging or whatever it is by using or employing those processes. We really have to discover, again, measuring the different forms of quality, we have to go discover those.
That's like so awesome. Like, I mean, that's like, it's totally awesome because that's exactly it. Is that we keep thinking that if I just keep following this recipe, right? Again, it's the wrong focus. We just keep thinking, well, if I do this step and this step and this step, I followed the process, and because I followed the process, reward me as a learning professional because I did what I was supposed to do. So I have, and that's what we do is we take ourselves out of the outcome. We just remove ourselves from the outcome and we go, well, I followed the process and that's what it said in whatever XYZ textbook that's what it is that I'm supposed to do. And therefore you can't fault me if it did or didn't work, right?
Yeah.
And we have to just get over that. We have to quit pointing to the toolkit and actually, pay attention to what really matters. I mean, talk about a meaningful, memorable, motivational moment, and that is by having the security and confidence in ourselves that by kind of following that meandering road wherever the stakeholders may lead us, that we're going to find our way through. And that our job is to help facilitate and guide that process, not control it.
We have to have the tools in order to be able to guide that process. We have to have an iterative process. I believe in SAM. I'll be a big proponent of it. And we also have to have design principles that, making things meaningful, memorable, motivational. We have to have principles that guide us into that. But yeah, it is our obligation to lead that journey.
I was going to say all that time studying instructional design down the drain.
Well, it's fundamental, and I explain this to people because I have it too. I mean, we paid a lot of money and spent a lot of time to learn these things, but it's the reason we learn math, even though we have a calculator. That you have to understand why we're adding numbers or doing division or things like that. And so it is, and I tell everybody, I am a big fan of Addie. I am now, have been for years, I will always be. She's just not meant to do what we're asking her to do nowadays, and that's the only reason why we need to go with something else. But the fundamentals of instructional design, I wish more people had, so that we could have the debate on, what is it relevant to follow Gagne's, events of instruction, or what does aligning the Bloom's taxonomy mean to us, or what is taking more of a constructivist approach to instruction mean? And these things would be great for us to debate and have these conversations, not necessarily in terms of a project, because that's a little heady for most people. But the fundamental parts of instructional design are important for all of us to know.
Absolutely, and I'm just like in awe of this moment. I'm so excited in this conversation, just because I think it's so critical to kind of almost let people off the hook, but then also make them accountable.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is that we want to do, right? We want to push people forward in the learning profession to make these transformations, to actually, recognize that there's a new path and to get started on that particular path. But I'm excited that this all came out today on this particular conversation. So I'll
tell you one thing, and it was eye-opening to me several years ago. Ethan Edwards, our chief instructional strategist at Allen Interactions, and has been doing our training and writing, and is very smart and thoughtful about design, makes the comment that here in our business we make choices to do things that may be a compromise to our principles. And his argument was, it's not bad that we do that. It's bad that we don't know why we did it. And I think that's what's crucial about it. And I was on a call and he said that years ago, and I was just like, I had to stop and go get a drink of water and walk around for a little bit. I'm like, that's absolutely the truth. As instructional designers, if we go in and we make choices, do we know it's because from our learned side of us, our professional side, our trained side, or is it just gut instinct and we made a choice and we can't be held accountable for that? And I think it's fundamentally important. You're going to have to make a decision, but if you were called to account for it, would you be able to answer that? And I think that's that don't let your principles get in the way of success kind of comment that I have. You have to have the principles as a guiding way, but we have to make compromises, but do we know why we're making them? That's the most important thing.
Yeah, that's just very impactful. That's just really great. And we've got, so Corey's joined us. Corey, I just want to see if how's your microphone? Is it working?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Oh, Yeah, there you are. Hey.
Okay, cool.
So, talk about somebody who has worked in some really challenging learning environments. And when I say that, like, that should be on like the biggest type and the biggest letters ever. So you're dialing in today from the Philippines, but you've done work in war zones.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so some of these challenges, I mean, when you're talking about, military operations, when you're talking about, being in, trying to serve an organization that's very rigid in a lot of ways, how are you addressing some of these design challenges? How do you do this trade-off in coming up with quality learning programs, but in an environment that's very much focused on this is what the world should look like, right?
Right. Well, the weird thing is, as Trish implied, I've worked in Iraq and I worked in Afghanistan for a number of years, for most of the last 10 years, actually. But the interesting thing about those assignments that I had is that although I was working as a defense contractor and we had a lot of rules to stay within those boundaries, we were in an environment that was highly fluid. And so for me, Addie it always felt a little bit like putting my left shoe on my right foot, because it just didn't fit with how we had to do things there. Literally, we would have to adapt our processes on the fly. Somebody makes a new decision, and suddenly the context in which we're operating is completely different than it was yesterday. And of course, that's true in many business cases around the world today. But when I first read about the successive approximation model, I was like, yeah, that's a lot closer to what I have been cobbling together the best of my ability for the last 10 years. You absolutely have to continue to evaluate and continue to adapt. And we did have the additional challenge of having to focus that adaptation within the confines of the many, many regulations that were governing everything that we did. So yeah.
Well, and then I also think about the environments that you're in and the things that you've been, training on. And I've had some insight because we worked together on your CPLP work product and on the CPLP certification process overall. So, I mean, some of the, talk about organizational constraints. It doesn't get any more crazy than things that you've gone through on, jetways and flight pads and all kinds of nutty stuff. But, the thing that I talk with people about all the time with training is risk. Like, what's the risk of people not being able to achieve the performance after they've, gone through whatever kind of learning program? And in your particular case, I mean, if you were rigid about just staying with your principles and trying to impose something on it, people could die. I mean, like, you've got, in some cases, and especially when you're talking about, well, any of the subject matter that I have familiarity with that you've worked on. So how do you get that mindset, Corey? How do you get that flexibility in really trying to drive towards what the real outcome and quality measure that's necessary versus something that you feel kind of like stuck on or tied to?
Sure. Well, it was, for me, as a learning professional, it was a constant fight between the rules and the regulations and the expectations of management and the reality of what was happening on the project. So there would be cases where, like talking about safety training, for example, obviously if a significant incident occurred and there was a work-related fatality or very, very serious injury, then there would be training revolving around the incident that resulted in that, and that had to be put aside your rule book for a minute. Let's focus on what happened and focus on how we got there. So it was a constant battle, not just in the safety world, but in many different environments or different subject matters that we worked with. It was a constant battle between, the people that didn't really spend much time in the field and what their expectations were, managing those and communicating the problems that we knew were happening on the ground level, and being able to make the two meet somehow. It was a constant dialogue, really. I just had to always be advocating the position and the reality that people were dealing with on a project ground level up to management. So.
Really, just really interesting stuff. So where are you in using SAM in your work, Corey? I mean, how much of the process have you really implemented? In the comment that you just made too, as far as when you saw SAM, you were like, wow, this is really modeling after something that I've been doing intuitively for a while. So where are you kind of in the process of really implementing more and more SAM in your work?
Well, I'm sort of in between projects at the moment. I'm getting ready to start a new assignment, but in my experience, it's I guess encouraging more evaluation and revamping of material as the processes evolve, encouraging these points of time where you can review and go back and adapt as needed, and really implementing measurement tools that help us get the information that we need. That's where I've been pushing it the most. I will say that the groups that I've worked with have, and I think this is true of a lot of people outside the U.S. in my experience, they haven't really been married to the ADDIE model, and so that has been a benefit in a way because I haven't had to steer them away from a particular way of thinking about it. Instead, I was just able to say, okay, this is what I see as the need, and this is how we need to go about it. It was really more just the challenge of convincing people that we needed to take time out to measure and evaluate and adapt and revamp things, as opposed to just pushing forward and checking the box and ticking more names off the list as having received the training. That was the biggest challenge that I really had. Is they just wanted to, well, we want to get everybody trained. Okay, well what does that mean? I can put everybody in a classroom for an hour, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're trained if the material isn't meeting the need, and we're constantly having to revamp and redevelop that.
Absolutely. No, that makes an awful lot of sense. And part of what we were talking about before, yeah, Mark, that sounds familiar. Part of what we were talking about before is that transparency in the process, right? So if you've got a particular organization that you're working with that hasn't built up the ADDIE habit, if you will, you've got sometimes a little bit more leeway to introduce something. Because they're not getting past what they, originally envisioned of what the actual process is for putting a training program or a learning program together. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. So I know that we're coming up on the top of the hour here, and we're going to start winding down the conversation today. You have to excuse me. I'm just so excited. I had there was a lot of aha moments actually in this phone call for me too, because I know for me, often letting my principles get in the way of success. I could be the poster child for that at times on a number of different levels. But that being said, I want to make sure that while we still have Richard here for the next couple of minutes, that Mark, Corey, you've got an opportunity. Are there any other questions that you have for Richard before we close for today?
I don't necessarily think I have any other questions. I think I'm coming away with, hey, we're not taking really a risk at doing this. I mean, I think it allows us some freedom to, we're really about, we want to have good outcomes, and so we've got the freedom to go to our sponsors and stakeholders and say, listen, there's a reason why we're doing this, that it is truly consultative in the sense that it's really about you guys. It's not about us. I think that's, and if you carry that conviction around, I think you could, allow this process to pervade your process that you're doing now. So that's what we've been able to do. So, from my standpoint, thank you, Richard.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I just wanted to say, I apologize that I was late joining the call. I got mixed up on my times. That's one of the hazards of it rarely happens for me, but it did happen today, so I apologize for that. I thought that the call started at 9 o'clock my time. It turns out it was 8 o'clock my time, so I screwed that up. But I am looking forward to watching the recording and catching up on everything that I missed. I really am, was looking forward to this conversation, and I wish that I'd heard the rest of it already.
Well, that was some good stuff early on. So you'll enjoy watching it.
Well, the thing that's really just amazing to me overall, Richard, is, as I've shared with you before and as I've, tweeted about and Instagrammed and LinkedIn and all the rest of it on social media, I mean, literally every time I get off of a plane at somewhere in the world, there is somebody there as a learning professional who's picking me up who says, have you read that, Leaving Addie for Sam? What do you think about what it is that they're doing there at Allen Interactions? What do you think about this whole thing about, looking at moving away from Addie and moving to more of this iterative process? So, it's just really amazing to see how much you are advancing the dial. I mean, how much learning is changing and how impactful, what you've been able to put in the Leaving Addie for Sam book and Leaving Addie for Sam. I'm going to hold up my little field guide again for a second here. So as we're closing, Richard, any last words of brilliance before we close down the Hangout for today?
Well, I have to go back and say that, Michael Allen, when he, identified, created, and built SAM, was intending to empower all of us in the profession with a method and a strategy to build better learning experiences. And at Allen Interactions, we've been here for 21 years. We've been endeavoring to do that day in and day out. It is not perfect. It is not flawless. It is not without failures. But we have the opportunity using an iterative process to take advantage of those and to gain insight from conversations and discussions and all of the design activities that we do. And I think if I was to say anything to anyone out there who's thinking about, what they're doing and changing to a more iterative process, or really just thinking about their role as more consultative, and don't fear the failure. Don't fear putting something out there, because as long as you didn't spend 3 or 4 weeks on some idea and you have to start back over again, knowing what not to do is as empowering and important as knowing what to do, and that's how we define that. We have, because our industry or our profession has been based on product development, and we want to go create a product, and we do analysis and get people to sign off, and a design get people to sign off. We're looking for achieving agreement, and that's not really what a good design is. We want to have a debate and a discussion, and so the baby steps are find ways that you can get moments to debate and discuss and brainstorm. And if it only is 1 or 2 moments each project, then eventually your projects will be all about that. And that's how you would start to implement SAM, and really looking at more of a challenge-based design approach to all of your learning experiences.
It's pretty awesome. So, Richard, thanks so much today for joining us. I really appreciate it. Yay, cake! We've got another Google Hangout in the bag. And Corey, Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Rob, thanks for doing all the back-end stuff. And we'll see you next time. Have a good day, everybody.